When you're defining a disorder in psychology, one of the most important aspects is it interfering with your normal functioning? So like you say, you can live with levels of anxiety, but of course clinical anxiety is impinging on your ability to live a full life.
Hello, I'm Dr Jodi Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Corey Jackson. Corey blends the very best of what modern research and ancient wisdom bring to managing stress, anxiety, overwhelming emotions, and burnout, and of course, amplifying and elevating well-being. He's the lead trainer of the Cultivating Emotional Balance project, and just because he's not busy enough, he's also a PhD candidate researching how mindfulness training affects emotional regulation. Corey, thank you so much for joining us. Before we start to talk about mindfulness and meditation and stress and anxiety and emotions, what I'd really love for you to do is to share with us all the journey that's brought you to sitting here today. You've got such an interesting history, and I'd love for you to share with us some of your story, please.
Sure. So let's start at university. I went to the Conservatorium of Music in Brisbane. It was a sort of fledgling jazz program. It was only a couple of years long back then. And when I was done, a few things happened. One, I was really stressed and I had a lot of anxiety and likely depression issues, although I never went and saw anyone about it. And rather than what I decided I needed was a change, and I have a Canadian citizenship, so I actually dropped what I was doing and I moved to Toronto, to Canada, and I did a performance degree in music over there. And so the reason for me, there are multiple ways of telling this story, but the reason for me that's interesting is that when I arrived in Toronto, I didn't know anyone. It was freezing cold. I was from Queensland. And I had all the same kind of nervous, anxious reactions I was having as part of the anxiety issues in Australia. But this time I loved them. Like, it was really exciting. I was in this city. It's the biggest, it's bigger than Sydney. It's got all these different ethnicities. It was really interesting time. And what I sort of reinterpreted, I guess, not on purpose, as this really exciting time rather than a really anxious time. And that started the thinking about, well, that's really interesting. That the same kind of, it's your interpretation of things, the same physiology can actually be interpreted differently. Anyway, that, went ahead, I did the degree, and in amongst all that, of course, I got a bit stressed out as well. Things went south from time to time. And I'd had an interest in meditation and a kind of passing interest in Buddhism, as much as it would help me play the piano better. That's all I really cared about. And so I looked into different approaches to be able to pay attention. This is the secret weapon, I decided. If I wanted to play better piano and get more gigs and, be better than the 100 other piano players in my neighborhood, which is what it felt like back then I thought attention might help. And so I tried a few different things. Turns out there's a lot of Tibetans have, this expat population. There's quite a lot in Toronto and Montreal. And so I went to sort of learn about their approach to attention training, basically. And I really liked it. And then not only that, I found it had this flow-on effect into all these other aspects of my life that I hadn't intended or expected. And so I got so interested, I dropped what I was doing again, and I moved to India. And so I learned to speak, read, and write Tibetan so I could study the philosophy, the meditation techniques, the psychology in Tibetan, with them in their language. So I didn't get these filters of translators and so on. And in amongst all that, I ended up, I came back to the West from time to time, and I found people would ask me to translate to begin with, but also ask questions about just Buddhist-based questions or mindfulness-based questions and so on. And so I went back and did a psych degree, and at the same time I did a degree in Sanskrit, so another language that had really rich history of contemplative traditions,
Yes.
And so, that's how this Cultivating Emotional Balance, it was one of the only projects around, still is one of the only projects that uses meditation techniques taken straight out of the tradition, unchanged, and put to use with a scientific combination. In this case, we combine a scientific understanding of emotions and emotion regulation, and combine the two. And I would say it's one of the very few now. I can think of two others that actually use the authentic traditions that haven't changed the definitions, the operationalization, and so on of mindfulness. It's stayed the same as it has for thousands of years. Um, and so, yeah, I did all that. And then eventually I was working with paramedics and some people up here on the Sunshine Coast and at the university. And they said, hey, would you be interested in researching this stuff? I said, not really. They said, no, it'd probably be interesting. I said, yeah, but I'm busy. Anyway, I kind of ended up agreeing to a master's. And then my supervisor said, we should make it a PhD. And so here I am basically researching a lot of the techniques and approaches that I also teach in terms of, to my clients in terms of stress reduction, overcoming overwhelm, if you like, and these sorts of things.
Thank you for sharing that. That's fascinating. And oh goodness, just to really be able to follow what lights you up is a very special thing to be able to do, isn't it? And
Yeah.
to take those risks, to be so passionate about your music, but then for your attention to turn in a new direction, to travel overseas. And you were overseas in India for some time, weren't you? A number of years.
I was there for a total of about 6 years. The longest was probably 2 years. Twice I was there for a couple of years at a time, and I would come back and work, usually in the US, sometimes in Hong Kong. And I would get contract gigs, and I'd take a band out onto a cruise ship or to a hotel in Hong Kong or something like this, and make the money and then go back and spend another year. Yeah, so I did a total of about 6 years, I think, but it wasn't 6 straight years.
Yes, I understand. One of the things that I know listeners will be curious about, as am I, is what was your experience like when you first started meditating? Because it is a challenging experience to undertake. And I'll share with you that when I was diagnosed with depression and started seeing a wonderful psychologist, he taught me to meditate. And at the time, I was living here, working, no children, just fur babies. And I meditated twice a day for 20 minutes. I built up to that. And it had the most profound impact on my mental health, my well-being. It was a really beautiful experience. But I remember when I started, it was incredibly hard. Was it incredibly hard for you when you started too?
Yeah, it was. I feel like I had two starts. One time I kind of just read about it and was interested in it, and I just kind of did and this is pre-YouTube, of course, I just did as I'd read, and I found it helped. But I think in my mind I had it as this: when things are starting to get out of control, here's something you can do that kind of helps you get, pull it back together. So that was, my first sort of experience with it. And then in Canada, I went to the Zen Center and I went to a few different places, but the Tibetan, a Tibetan approach, to my surprise, was by far the most clear. And it stopped, rather than talk about here's a survival and a coping mechanism. They don't talk about coping mechanisms. They're not interested in coping mechanisms. We're interested in really high levels of mental health. Wherever you are right now isn't the issue. It's you can get to these really high levels of mental health. So let's look at how we would do that. It's not a sort of medical model where we try to fix people and bring them back to normal. And so that, yes, it was hard, in as much as, you're told not to be distracted and you're distracted all the time. But at the same time, you're given the goals, you're given, and the explanation as to why it works and what you should expect are so clear that when you sit down to meditate and it doesn't go well, it's like, oh, this is what I was told would happen. So, you run with it. And I also had the advantage of some teachers who, to my observation, clearly had their act together. So it was sort of like this idea, well, you're telling me I should do this, and I kind of want a bit of whatever you've got. So,
Yes.
yeah,
What he's having or she's having.
yeah, that's right. So it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool. And of course, I'm told I won't be good at it. I'm like, that's all right. I'm a musician. I started off, I'm used to feeling like I'm not good at what I'm doing, and practice will make me better. So I was kind of all right. It really mapped well with the music training, to be honest.
Yes, I can understand that. And I've practiced karate for a long time, and there is a saying that outside of karate, even that everybody starts as a white belt.
Right.
And I think it's a really nice place to be because there's no expectation. Whatever it is that we're starting, when we're just starting and learning something new, we would be unkind to have expectations on ourselves when we're at the beginning. And that's the thing about practice and improving. What I'd love you to do is to share with us how mindfulness and how meditation can have such a powerful effect on mental health. Can you talk to us a bit about that from both perspectives that you bring to this beautiful conversation?
So yeah, the it's a really good question and a really important point. And if we start on the sort of peer review, well, no, I shouldn't say. So we start on the psych side of it. Um, there's some problems already because when we say mindfulness, I often joke if you had a mindfulness conference with 100 psychiatrists, you would have 135 different definitions of what mindfulness is. So yeah, so if you're actually going to talk about it, and psychology, has been very poor at clearly defining its terms, or if it has, it's been very difficult to generalize them so that everyone uses them. So there's a really big issue here. There's a brilliant paper uh, by Van Dam. He lives down there in Melbourne called Mind the Hype. And it's a review on mindfulness research that's really worth looking into because he pulls out some of the most important points. One of which is when someone says, I've researched mindfulness, we don't know what they're doing. We don't know what they're doing. We don't know are you training people to meditate? Are you teaching them to eat sultanas? We don't really know what's actually happening. So so when you start talking about the psych side, it's already problematic, which is a big part of what I'm doing actually. What it does seem to do is to be able to, say, increase people's working memory capacity. And when you do that sort of thing, then it seems to, how to say it means you sort of need more stress to kind of revert back into automatic problematic behaviors, if that makes sense.
So it's raising the threshold
Yeah,
for what we can cope
it,
with.
it
Yes.
does seem to. It does seem to.
Mm.
It depends, of course, what you're talking about with mindfulness, because there's a big push in, say, the modern popularization in the last 40 years or so, with this idea of non-judgmental moment-to-moment awareness as a definition, which doesn't come from a contemplative source. We don't talk about it like that in Buddhism, certainly not in the Tibetan tradition. So the it's hard to really it is really hard to say, and I sound like I'm being a bit harsh on everyone, but I have written a whole lit review for my PhD on mindfulness research, and it's pretty depressing. Um, just because you can't find, it's really hard to find out what people are doing. 3 papers all found this, and they all used mindfulness, but we don't know how they trained in it or what their mindfulness was, how they operationalized it, nothing. So there's a big effort to clean that up, which this paper is really. There's some really exciting research. I should sort of end on a more positive note. But it's in its infancy, and people are trying to figure it out, and it really is coming around, which is helpful. So there's one aspect that seems to it reduces people's reactivity, automatic reactivity. So that's really helpful because a lot of our reactivity under stress leads to more stress.
Mm.
Uh,
And that's the
yeah,
truth.
totally. I mean, that's okay. That just makes you human. Sometimes when I do emotion stuff, I talk sometimes about Paul Ekman, who's a brilliant emotions researcher, retired now, who talks about regrettable emotional episodes. And one of the things when I say, what do you think makes it regrettable? And one of the things people sometimes say is that I've done exactly the same thing before. And I say, yeah, of course, it's learned behavior. You've learned to react in this way, and you can unlearn it. And mindfulness will, attention training, I like to call it, will really help with that. From the contemplative side, so if you flip over to this other way of approaching it, mindfulness, let's start with meditation. Meditation translates from Sanskrit or Tibetan really well as cultivation or familiarization. So it's when people are talking, when you're reading these source texts in Tibetan and so on, Sanskrit, they're talking about cultivating mindfulness. It's not mindfulness meditation, which is what we say. And so well, that's interesting. So when you sit down to do these sessions, you should be able to say what you're cultivating. And if you're cultivating mindfulness, well, of course, you have to know what mindfulness is. And again, in these languages, mindfulness just means remember. It doesn't really have any extra meaning. And they equate remembering with being focused and forgetting with being distracted. So if you're trying to meditate, okay, I'm going to pay attention to the movement of my body somewhere as I breathe. and then I start writing a shopping list or planning my revenge on someone or something, we just say you forgot. You're distracted or you forgot. And then that flows into the outside world. If I've decided I'm going to change my behavior and try to, someone who I find annoying, I'm going to try to change the way I approach them and treat them with a bit more kindness and respect. And then I accidentally say something snarky when I meet them. Again, it's the same thing. I just forgot what it was that I was planning to do. That's okay. You can fix that. So
Yes.
from that perspective, it's this idea of being able to cultivate, firstly, your memory, but what you want to do with that is where it gets important. And certainly from a Buddhist perspective, mindfulness in and of itself is important, but it doesn't really do anything for you. You need to use it for certain things. And one of those things might be understanding, having a closer look at your emotions and how they work and how you could get them working for you. Another way might be, and an important way would be developing kindness and compassion, so that compassion and kindness inform the way that you engage with yourself, but also with others. And so again, it comes down to this idea of, well, you do these meditations that cultivate compassion, but first you have to cultivate your memory so that you can have a good enough focus to be able to cultivate compassion, which is surprisingly hard. And then you have to understand what compassion means, because we tend to get that wrong in English in speaking cultures. So I hope that's helpful. I mean, in a way, it's a really big topic. So how does Buddhism approach meditation for mental health? There's 2,500 years of peer-reviewed studies, and there's a lot to say in there. But I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you. It's so interesting to look at the juxtaposition of the psychology perspective and how you've done your a literature review for those who haven't had the joy, is really gathering all of the relevant literature in your area of study and understanding it and analysing it from a critical perspective, understanding how the research has been undertaken, what the findings, how valid and reliable it is. So you're actually sort of pulling together everything that's been done before you so that you can also look at what you can do moving forward as a researcher to sort of add to the body of knowledge. And so having done that and having seen that in the West, I suppose, if we were to say in the West, that we're in our infancy because there's so much misunderstanding and there's so many definitions and there's no one approach, versus the Eastern traditions, whereby there are thousands of years of history and this really beautiful foundation. And so for you to be able to bring those together can't be easy, but it's also very exciting.
It is very exciting, and it's fun because, say, in what we're working on, we're looking at causes of, say, anxiety and well, not causes, we should say, predictors of anxiety and depression. So instead of targeting the symptoms of anxiety, we're looking at what sort of things do we know drive that. And so, say, for example, one of them is rumination. And when you look at rumination, you dig deeper, there's research that breaks rumination up into different types, and there's one that's more adaptive than another. So if you keep drilling down, it gets more and more interesting. And what we're suggesting, or going to try out in a few months' time, does just training people in their attention, like just explaining how attention works, like training them in attention, does this help them stay on the more adaptive side? And if so, does that help reduce anxiety symptoms without ever having talked about it? And then the other part of the research is just giving people emotions training, in which we explain how emotions work and help them out in that way. Because, of course, emotions are also the building blocks of disorders. You talk about the fear family of emotions. If you're talking about anxiety, you have to talk about the fear family of emotions. And the experience of anxiety, we know from research, is not the subjective experience of fear. For a person with anxiety is not different than a person who doesn't have anxiety. It's about the intensity and frequency. So it's a really important way to look. And I'm pleased to say I'm piggybacking on a bit of a push in recent years to do this, to look into finding out some of the deeper causes of mental disorders, because we don't know. And it's a really new field, right? But until up to date, if you think about the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, there isn't a single disorder in there that we know the cause of. Not a single one. which means you can't come up with treatments. It's not like medicine. You find a virus and you can develop a treatment, or a bacterial infection. If you have a broken arm, and it's binary. It's like when your arm's fixed, we know. But
Yes.
we talk about mental health, you're on a continuum. And we know that depression, antidepressants work for you, for your anxiety, but not for your anxiety, and depressants work. Like, we haven't developed any understanding of what the causes are. And I'm really pleased to say some people are, and that's part of what we're working on, is to say, look, rather than symptom management, let's look at some of the things we know that drive symptoms, and see what we can do about that by manipulating those.
It's going to be a surprise to a lot of our listeners to this episode to know that the causes aren't well understood in any way. And the DSM groups symptoms. And if you have this group of symptoms, then this is the likely diagnosis. And so, whilst we understand the symptoms that relate to different anxiety disorders, for example, understanding the cause will move us in a huge way towards being able to better help people not only to manage what they're experiencing, but also in the preventative realm
Oh,
of
yeah.
being able to reduce the likelihood of things getting to a point where they're so extreme and frequent, it's really interfering with like daily function and really disabling.
Yeah, it might help to think about it in terms of a good way to explain it is, if anyone's old enough to, I guess people old enough to remember, when AIDS first started happening, so the autoimmune deficiency syndrome, what was happening is there are these people getting sick and tragically dying from these clusters of symptoms. So as doctors, could watch it and say, hey, these people are obviously sick with the same thing. We have no idea what it is. So it's called a syndrome. That's a very important word here, autoimmune deficiency syndrome. And they do some super clever research and work, and they find actually it's a virus driving it. And now you have HIV. So now it's not a syndrome anymore. Now it's a disease. And that's really important difference. It goes from a syndrome, which is a cluster of symptoms for which we don't know the cause, to a disease. So now it's a cluster of symptoms. We do know the cause, and we can develop treatments, because now we look at that, antivirals and so on. Whereas that's the point. When you look at the diagnostic statistical manual, every single disorder in there is a syndrome, every single one. It's really important to understand that we don't know. And I'm telling you when I did my psych degree, I'm telling you things that I was taught by the psychologists who were teaching it. This isn't me sort of railing against psychology or anything. But I do think it's helpful to know that while a diagnosis is actually really helpful, as you said, we know the different types of anxiety, and it's really helpful to know what's going on for you. It's not like a medical diagnosis where now we have a treatment and away we go. It's not like that.
No, and it's an exciting area of research, but it's also really important, I think, for those of us with anxiety. And I know listeners are coming to the podcast and learning for themselves and learning for the people that they love and care about. And it can be so difficult to live with anxiety. And so hopefully we'll all be the beneficiaries of these movements in science to better understand. But in the meantime, I'd really love for you to share with us what mindfulness and what meditation and understanding our emotions in a different way, how can you help support listeners to be able to better manage their anxiety? I talk about, I come from an acceptance and commitment therapy point of view and perspective and passion. And so we really talk about, well, we're not here to get rid of it. We wouldn't want to, even if we could. It's important that we have anxiety, it's protective. But how can we kind of dial it down and sort of move it to the background, a bit like a radio playing behind us, so that we can sort of live this full life? What can you teach us today to help us all sort of manage better?
Sure. Look, that's a really important question. So let's look at it like this. Firstly, just while we're sort of doing some nerdy psychology stuff, one of the ways that we talk, one of the things that makes something a disorder, when you're defining a disorder in psychology, one of the most important aspects is it interfering with your normal functioning? So, so like you say, you can live with levels of anxiety, but of course, clinical anxiety is impinging on your ability to live a full life. So, and of course, that's different for everyone, which makes the whole thing a bit problematic, but it's a nice way of thinking about it. So let's pull, obviously, if you're in this realm where anxiety is negatively impacting your ability to function, then something needs to be done and it is problematic. Okay. Now, if we shift down into looking at what the building blocks of anxiety are, and I'll just stay on the psych side for the time being. Well, those building blocks are emotions. And I'm constantly amazed that, in say a few years of preschool, maybe 7 or 8 years of primary school, another however many, 4 or 5 years of high school, maybe even a 4-year medical degree and postgrad work, no one talks about emotion regulation. I find this staggering. Because emotions are mysterious, right? Psychology, we know quite a lot about them. There's nothing mysterious about your emotions. And we're throwing these teachers and healthcare professionals out into these fields we know are stressful. And then when they burn out, we try to figure out what's wrong with them. And the answer is nothing, actually. Their attention and emotion systems are working fine. It's just we're putting them in these situations they shouldn't be expected to handle without training.
Yes.
And so this is true. And frankly, after the pandemic and even before, it's just almost true for everyone. So let's look at emotions. And this is how I would recommend, how I do work with people, is the building blocks of your anxiety are the emotional reactions. And if you understand how they work, that's the first step. And so I call it emotion skills training. We go through sort of the timeline and the components of an emotional reaction and where you can intervene and where you can't. Because what anxiety, clinical anxiety is emotions that have just run out of control. And if you could learn to regulate them earlier, you can actually prevent them ever getting into this realm where they're impinging on your ability to function. You just need to understand how the building blocks work. Actually, no, that's the first stage. You need more than that. Because what emotions have evolved to do in this way is that they happen to us without us knowing. So you can be emotional for a long time and not know that it's happening, which is very adaptive if you're a hunter-gatherer society, like we've evolved to live in. It's a bit hard in the 21st century. And so then you need it to understand emotions, and you can analyze retrospectively. It's like, oh, what happened? I know this happened. I can put my emotional event together very clearly after the fact, but it's not so helpful. You often joke, you want to catch yourself in the wind-up, not in the follow-through, if you're angry about something. And here's the key element then. What you need to be able to become, say, lucid, like conscious in the midst of those high emotional events is attention skills. And we've seen again, by developing high-end attention skills, then you see the emotional event happening. And I should be clear, in the beginning and for some time, you still experience all the physiology of the emotion. It still happens. But now you're completely aware of what's happening, which is a big deal, because now, and here's the third component. So we've got the emotional understanding, we've got the attention training, and then the third component is having some contingency plan. It's like, next time this is happening to me, I'm going to try and do this. And for some people, that's just, find the breath in the body, think of rainbows and unicorns. You could, whatever you like, right? And so then you've got these are the three components. But you do need to find some accurate information around emotions, which is hard. It's not hard, it's couched in amongst of other stuff that's not so helpful, to be honest.
Yes.
Then you want attention training that's effective, which is why, to be honest, I ended up where I did with this particular approach, because it had the best effect on me. This is before I was into Buddhist stuff. I just wanted to pay attention better. Yes. And then you want contingency plans, and often what you'll need for that is a third objective person who can, you tell that to them. So it can be a therapist. It can even just be someone. I mean, I do this a lot with my clients, is just have the discussion. Hey, what would have happened if you did this? It's like, oh, I don't know. That's interesting. So now you've got a plan. You say, oh, okay, so we've got these three things together. And from here on in, it's a percentage game. You're going to get it wrong maybe 80% of the time. But as you do the attention training, right, you're going to drop that down to 60, 50, 40, 30% of the time. And as you do that, you're going to refine your contingency plans. You go, that one worked okay, but I might have been better if I did this. And so you can sort of manipulate this whole thing. And then what you end up with, and this is really important, what you end up with is your emotions working the way they've evolved to do, which is now operate as a signpost. It's like, hey, something important's happening. And your job then is to go, oh, that's interesting. It's fear. I must be under threat. Or it's anger. I feel like someone's in my way. Or it's sadness. I've got a sense of loss. Like you have these trigger themes. You say, oh, that's the emotions. I look at it and I go, oh, so what's happening and what can I do? And if you really have, this is now we're talking a high end level of training, what actions and what things can I say, do, or even think that are going to be of benefit to me and my community, not just to me. You want to talk about self-care, then look after your community. And so that's sort of where the whole thing heads if you combine emotion regulation and understanding with attention training.
Oh, you've summarized that so beautifully. And I just want to capture all of the gold that you're sharing, because it's so powerful for us, isn't it? For listeners, for us to be able to sort of picture ourselves in a situation where, with our beautiful 2020 hindsight vision, where we've kind of blown up, and depending on the circumstances will sort of dictate how we feel and how we're responding in the moment. But if we could sort of wind back the clock and, like you say, have this understanding of, well, something's building, something's happening, I'm experiencing this emotion. And like you say, have that presence of mind, have that in the moment understanding and awareness. It's not just happening to us, like we can look at it as it's building, and then be able to intervene at that point, like you say. And I love that analogy you used, that we want to sort of catch it in the backswing, not in the follow
Yeah,
through.
yeah,
And so, because the follow through can come through pretty hard sometimes,
yeah, that's right.
depending on who's around us. So, with the timing, what's the opportunity that we've got in terms of the timing? Sort of, is it different for different people in terms of when something begins to build to that kind of, the backswing begins versus the follow through? How long have we got as emotions are building to the point where we kind of have lost control and we've really reacted in a situation we would have rather responded?
Yeah, so and it's different for different people. It's called an emotional profile, and it's a different for different people and for different emotions. So a really great example that we've used of, if you profile Barack Obama in terms of anger, he's actually very slow to build, but he does hit a point and he sustains a point of anger, and there are really good examples of it if you look for them, where he doesn't sort of explode and it's all over. He hits this anger and he just goes, and he keeps it up. And mostly, it's really interesting to watch him. That mostly he's, I don't know if he's constructive, but he's very accurate at what he wants to do. That he's not just lashing out. It's a really interesting. I mean, it's a bit dated now. I should come up with another one, but it's a really interesting person to watch, which is very different, say, than some tennis players I can think of, right? In terms of the way they react to much smaller issues, in terms of anger. So yes, it's different for everyone, and it's different in terms of the emotions. In terms of where you can intervene, though, it's basically an emotion. It moves through time, right? It starts, it happens, and it ends. And if you understand, emotions actually don't last very long. A long emotion, sadness tends to be the longest of all emotions, and it can last maybe 2 minutes at a time. But what we can do is almost seamlessly just re-trigger ourselves, so it feels like I've been sad for a whole day. But actually, it's a lot of individual moments put together, which is a lot of individual opportunities to get in and intervene. So there's the first part. You can actually start to move in between your individual emotional events, but then you can also make yourself lucid in the midst of an emotion at different times. And so at the beginning, you might be in the middle of saying or doing something and notice, and that's okay. Then you stop, but you can walk it all the way back to what we call impulse awareness, where the impulse to act, the emotion is triggered very, very quickly, hundredths of a second. And then there's this impulse to act, and it's the impulse that you notice. When you notice the impulse, then you have the opportunity to sort of use these contingency plans you would have come up with beforehand. And they start off very, very simple, but you can get them quite subtle over time. And so this is, we're still all in the realm of psychology here. If you push it a little further into the kind of contemplative side, then there's evidence, and there's certainly a position where you can even get in before that. So that, rather than there's proto emotions, there's these things that happen even before the emotion takes shape, and you can get in and play around with that in a way that will drive the things you say and do, in order for them to be constructive rather than destructive. So it's different for everyone, and your level of training will dictate where you can intervene.
Yes. One of the things that's really stuck for me was the idea that we can have an emotion that doesn't last a long period of time, but we can sit in that and it can come with us for the whole day. And yesterday there was an experience here in our home that caused great disappointment and sadness for our daughter. And the sadness, it lasted hours. And I used all the skills that I have in terms of my training and my experience and my parenting. And one of the things that I really love to do is get out of your head and into your body, move, do something, shift. And we experience it. I empathize, I validate. There's lots of permission to just accept how we feel, knowing that when we have that acceptance, we tend to move through our emotions more quickly than we would if we were just sort of like really putting it all behind the damn wall. But it was really interesting to me, and I was able to sort of zoom out a little bit and observe what was happening with a bit of curiosity and a bit of confusion as well, because kids change as they age.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
and so you're dealing with different hormone profiles, and you're dealing with just different general experiences in their life. And I was curious because I was thinking, well, I feel like I've sort of used my toolkit, and I was sort of thinking about, well, different ways that I could address this situation. And I was a bit stuck, to be honest, because I really am one for like just experiencing how you feel. But there's got to be a point at which we've got to make a choice. Is that a reasonable thing to say, that we have agency to shift things so that we don't have to kind of wallow?
Yeah, wallowing's a problem. Here's a good example, I guess, of how some emotional skills, well, like understanding emotions, kind of is helpful. The overall, we talk about a trigger theme. So, in general, sadness is triggered by some kind of loss. Like
Mm,
whether I've lost my favorite pen or my partner or grandparents or whoever. Like it's anywhere on that spectrum. And so that's probably a part of sadness, and its function is to mostly elicit social support. In general, when you see somebody who is sad, you tend to move towards them and you're looking for support. And it's not necessarily fixing what's wrong. It's more about there being some support. And I guess there's some benefit in someone coming in and going, yeah, I see what's happening to you, and it really does suck. Like that. No worries. That sucks. No worries. I totally agree. And then you're right. What do you want to do next is the question. Is like
mm.
if wallowing in it would help, then I would recommend wallowing, but of course it won't. Um, and this is where so one of the other parts of the PhD I'm doing, or the research we're working on, oh no, rumination, I think I mentioned, is really linked to sadness and depression. And so there's a reflective and a brooding type of rumination.
Can you just define rumination? Most people will probably know, but it'd be really good just in the context of this really interesting discussion for people to be really clear on what it is that you're talking about.
Yeah, sure. It's rethinking, it's examining prior events, right? And usually in such a way that they re-trigger the event emotionally for you. Just to put in a nutshell. That's how it's usually thought of. But turns out that there is this sort of more reflective type, which has less of the reliving, and it's more of a problem solving. So, it's a really interesting area. It's been around for some time, but it's kind of been neglected a bit. And so, the first part is, when working with someone through sadness, look if there is almost certainly rumination happening, which is so they're re-triggering themselves. And can we sort of shift that rumination from this brooding type over to a more reflective problem-solving type? And part of the problems you want to solve is, well, how can I get back up and out of here and start functioning again? That's because the problem of losing something might not be just getting it back. A lot of the time, that's not the solution. It's not possible. So, so that's a big part of it. This rumination. How am I? And so don't have a lot of time, but if you want to dive more subtly, what we're talking about is actually your own relationship with your own mental activity. So only your own memories and ideas and so on. It's your relationship with that is what's really important. And you relate with it in such a way that you grasp it and cling to it, and it just re-triggers you and you relive it, is very hard to problem solve. So in a situation like that, yeah, it's like you want a person to come to the conclusion that I've got the support, I understand it's okay to feel like this, and now I guess I need to do something, to get myself up and functional and helpful again. And in doing so, I think sometimes in terms of grief, for example, I've worked with a few people, quite a few people who've lost someone close to them, and they sort of feel as if they shouldn't be allowed to go out and enjoy themselves again.
Mm.
And when they reflect back on it, it's like we want to sort of project forward from when you remember the person. Let me say it this way: when we get triggered emotionally, the whole world rearranges itself to be about me. That's what
Yes.
emotions do. They're short-term fixes to problems that are right in front of us. So when I remember a loss, the world reorients itself to be about me, and I'll get caught up in how it feels for me, my loss, which is okay. But actually, in these terms, you might actually use that. I mentioned before a signpost. So it can be this signpost. Oh, there's something important going on here, and I'm going to shift my attention. So here's why attention training is so important. I'm going to shift my attention to all the benefit and good things I got out of that relationship, right? Even though it's over. Now I'm going to reflect on that. And then what do I want from that? Well, I should learn from that and project forward out of that in a way that's going to be beneficial to me and my community. But I'm repeating this phrase intentionally. And so you get sort of meaning out of the loss in that way. And you can project forward you can turn the rumination into reflective rather than brooding. And you can even turn the emotional event into something that's beneficial for you and the people around you.
Mm.
Perfect world scenario. But that's sort of what you aim for. And I guess I mentioned at the beginning the difference between psychology and the Buddhist approaches is psychology aims to get you to cope, which is admirable and okay. Whereas the contemplative approaches are more about, this is problematic, but how do I use this to work and be of some benefit to everyone around me? And that
Mm.
approach is getting a lot more interest from researchers in places like Stanford and Harvard. They're not small time
Mm.
institutions. Stanford have a whole compassion care center based around Tibetan traditions of compassion cultivation. Actually, there's another one in Montreal. They're around the world. So, and University of Queensland as well. So there is this idea. People are coming around to this idea that even these unpleasant emotions that we experience can actually be these catalyzers or catalysts that project us forward into a way of thinking, speaking, and acting that is driven by this sort of concern, compassion. It's beneficial, and then research shows that the compassion has all these flow-on effects for my own mental health.
It's beautiful to see that this is the way things are moving in terms of mental health and in terms of humanity,
Yeah.
because there are so many challenges to all of us, no matter where we live, no matter what we do, no matter who we are. We have a common humanity. And for the Eastern traditions to be sort of finding their way into these places where there can be that more widespread connection with this learning is really powerful and really special. How would you support people to make a start with meditation practice?
So there are different meditation practices and different approaches because there are so many different types of people. So just let me
Mm.
be clear about that. So I can tell you how I function, which doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for everyone, but it's what worked for me because I had people, and admittedly they're pretty impressive people to me. These sort of Tibetan lamas, we call them, these teachers, and explain why I should do it. The situation you're in is basically, so what they say to me, the situation you're in is because you're distracted all the time. And if you live distracted all the time, it basically leads you down negative pathways. We have a negativity bias, we know through psychology, sort of research, and that's where you're going to head. So what we need to do is spend some time where our attention's under our control and we can put it in places that are helpful. This is fundamentally where it's at. Interesting. Then you look at neuroscientific ideas about attention, and there's just, to oversimplify, there are two neural systems for attention, oversimplifying this, but one is endogenous, so it's focused. We direct it where we want, and the other is exogenous, it's pulled away from us. So like right now, hopefully we're all using an endogenous system, but if my dog starts scratching at the door, it'll be pulled away to that, so these are these two types. And what you really want to just do is get used to, you want to understand the different experience of controlled versus captured attention is how I use this. That's how
Mm.
we do it. And understand that all your emotional reactions fall under the umbrella of captured attention. The way
Right.
to bring lucidity and understanding to your emotions is to bring your controlled attention back. So I would recommend just people starting out is what I do. I have sort of materials I give people. It's like, look, this is 5 minutes out of your day, and all it is you know getting understanding, putting your attention somewhere, and then having it'll get pulled away very quickly, and you notice and you bring it back, and that's all there is to it. The benefit you'll gain from understanding that has flow on effects, but that's fundamentally where it's at. Am I distracted or under control? And when you notice you're distracted, distraction tends to make us tense and say things we're not really conscious of, and so on. And so if you can notice I should say one more thing. Evolution seems to have evolved in such a way that we don't notice that we're distracted. So just noticing that you're distracted is huge. Just noticing that is so big, and then pulling it back, is extraordinary actually. So actually, just spending a few minutes sitting down, noticing you're distracted, and then pulling it back makes you quite extraordinary. And do that for 5 minutes a day, twice a day, you'll notice benefits. If you can up that to 15 minutes, you'll really start to notice some benefits. So that's it. You look for these short periods, and all you try and do something simple, which is, am I controlled or captured, and what do I do about that? Away
Yes.
you go. From there, that's the building blocks, everything else I've spoken about, so that all your actions and everything you say and do is informed by wisdom, kindness, and compassion.
Yes. And I know from personal experience, when I first learned to meditate, that I could sit and I would have my attention on the breath. And I've trained in a transcendental meditation. So that was a real gift to me from my psychologist. And it all went to the dogs when I became a mother.
Yeah,
It was a
yeah. Mhm.
good time, probably when I needed it most. I remember sitting, performing a progressive muscle relaxation, just a brief progressive muscle relaxation, sitting and then focusing my attention on the breath. And within what feels like milliseconds, then you start to think about, oh, did I put the chicken on the bench out of the freezer? And then you might be thinking about that, and then you'll notice, and then you'll bring your attention back to the breath, and then you might get an inhalation, not even an exhalation, and
Yeah,
then off
yeah.
it goes again. And like what you said at the start of our conversation, I learned, because we need to know that when we start, that this is what it's all about. It's about, yes, our attention will wander. It's about the noticing and the returning it back to, from the captured attention back to the controlled attention, and that we get better at that the more we do it. And eventually you will have gone through a few cycles of breathing, inhalation, exhalation, really focusing on the warmth of the air and the feeling in your nostrils and the sound, and really that beautiful focused attention. And then it will be captured again. And it could be captured for 5 minutes. I
Oh, yeah.
know they're meditating, and it could be almost the whole session. And we just have to have this kindness, show ourselves kindness, and understand that this is something that is a practice. We improve over time, and that the thoughts that capture our attention become kind of less sticky over time, don't they? And we can unhook more readily and come back. Is that a reasonable kind of? I mean, that was my experience. And that's a reasonable
Yeah.
summary.
Yeah, that's right. One of my Western teachers, close teachers, Alan Wallace, says, he says, you're working on a Teflon mind. He's trying to develop this mind where things don't stick to it. You're aware of them happening, but they don't. It's a nice analogy. And yeah, that's
Yes.
exactly right. If you look at, it's funny because I guess I was taught all this stuff very traditionally. And when you look at, if somebody decides, there's some young, maybe monk or maybe older, whatever, and they decide they're going to go into this like 9, 12 months retreat or more, yeah, up in the mountains all on their own. So they go to their teacher says, cool, you can do that if you want. The first thing they're told is like, okay, so before you go, here's what's going to happen for you. The first thing you're told is that when you start to meditate, you will mostly be distracted. So these people, this is like, it's like if somebody decides they're going to be a neuroscientist or something, they're going to be a specialist in their field, and that's what's going on here. I want to go be a professional contemplative, live up here and just go full time. And the first thing they're told is you're going to be rubbish at it. And I think it's really helpful, like when you start.
Yes, set the bar low.
Yeah, but you will get better, and when you do get better, here's what you'll notice. And so
Yes.
that's what you need these, I would call them measures. You need these measures of your success. And there are two. And one is, are the sessions getting better? Am I getting better at it? And of course, people do over the course of a week, 2 weeks. And am I noticing differences in my emotional reactions in the outside world? Because there's one of the failings of meditation training in modernity is it's treated um, as like an escape. It's like, oh, here's 30 minutes where you can relax and then go back to your
Mm.
otherwise unsatisfactory life, Um, whereas actually, then it comes back to this idea of cultivation. It's about cultivating the skills you need to survive in the outside world. It's no different than I like swimming laps. The uni has a great pool, and so to stay fit, I swim laps. But I don't swim laps so that if I ever fall into a swimming pool, I can swim up and back. I want to be just fit for everything. I want to be stronger, for everything. And this is the same. Meditation practices are designed to make you stronger and fitter and better able to not just cope, but turn problematic situations to your advantage and the advantage of the people around you through the skills you've learned in the meditation practices. And we're encouraged from genuine traditions. They say blur the lines between the session and the post session. You want to get up from that cushion or wherever you are, and bring everything you've got going on there. You want to bring that. The point is to bring that through,
Yeah.
everything else you do from here on in. And I think that sometimes people go, I just need to relax. I need to meditate. Um, that's okay. But, people don't sort of say, I just need to swim. I don't, I need to go to the gym because I just want to be able to, lift barbells. I want to go to the gym because I want to be stronger and fitter. And
Mm.
it would be good if that sort of is the way we started talking about how meditation works.
I love that. And I draw the comparison between I love CrossFit. I love CrossFit. And it's a strength and fitness training experience to build your strength, fitness, endurance, flexibility, functional movement to be able to do other things.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not, for a lot of people, that's what they love and that's all they do. And I remember talking to my coach when I started playing basketball, and he said, "This is it. CrossFit is not meant to be sort of in and of itself the thing that you do. Mind you, you can, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's designed there to build you and strengthen you so that you can live life. You can move, you can lift, you can climb, you can walk, you can play basketball, you can go and play tennis, and you're building this really brilliant foundation underneath you. So it's the foundation that sort of lifts you up and supports you to do other things. And I'm drawing that comparison with what you've shared about meditation, which is a very poignant learning for all of us, that it's not about just the 5 minutes sitting on the couch or on the cushion or mindfully drinking your tea or mindfully eating a raisin or a piece of chocolate, which are all ways that we can focus our attention. It's so much more than what's happening in those moments when you're doing that. Like you say, it's about bringing that to the benefit of you and your community outside of those times when you're actually sort of formally practicing.
Yeah.
So,
I would go a little further and say that actually, because meditation is such a big word, but it's actually that mindfulness, it's attention training is the CrossFit. Because once you've got your attention under your control, it's what can I do with that is what gets interesting. So because meditation stuff, there's so many different types and
right, yes.
but it's what can you do with your attention is
Yeah.
is the CrossFit version, which I really like this version. That's why I sort of got excited about it. Because yeah, that and in the contemplative traditions of Asia, that's what happened. It's like now that I've got all these attention skills, now that's cool. I feel really good and everything's great. What can I do with it to get, just as athletes train in high levels of physical health, it's our position that you can train in really high levels of mental health. And the kind of the strength and stretch and flexibility training that you would get here, what that is your attention. So how do I train my attention? How do I train in this mindfulness in order to use it for all these other amazing things that the human being's capable of?
That's it. Oh, thank you for bringing that in and helping us really be clear. So, as we bring this to a close, what I'd really love for you to share with us is how people can work with you. What can you do to support listeners, whether or not they might be individuals or in a workplace? And how can people find you and learn more from you over time through the work that you're doing, the research that you're undertaking?
Sure. Firstly, my website has a bunch of free resources, and so you can find there's one thing called the Exhausted Professionals Mindfulness Survival Guide, but it's for anyone. I'm going to change the title because you don't have to be professional or exhausted. But that has this 5-minute session. It has like a rundown over meditation, mindfulness, how it works, how it relates to emotions, and how to do it. So that's a pretty short little course you can do for free. There's other free ones around compassion and relaxation and so on. So if what I've said makes sense, and as I've mentioned, there's different approaches, and you should, I think, look into all different approaches. But if what I've said makes sense, then maybe just go to the website and see if those things are interesting. If they are, then just you'll see on my website you can make a time to have a chat. What I have is a 12-week sort of more in-depth program with a bit of one-to-one consulting and a group that meets every Monday night and so on, to really dial this stuff in. But you want to make sure this is right for you before you go jumping into anything like that.
Yes.
Otherwise, just there's a Cultivating Emotional Balance with Corey Jackson Facebook page. So just go there. If you're not on Facebook, please don't sign up just to go to that page. Stay off it.
It will capture too much of your attention.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, like if you're not on Facebook, just you're doing better. Don't worry about what I'm doing.
Yes.
So yeah, that's how I would say. And I guess that's part of this idea that you do want to poke around and see who's making the most sense for you, and sort of make a commitment to that. And not everyone will come across my stuff and think that it's the right thing for them. That's okay. But I hope you find someone who is.
Oh, thank you. It's finding the right fit. And what I'll do is I'll include the links to the Facebook page and to your website and to that resource in particular that you've mentioned. Plus, I think I'd really like to read Mind the Hype, and I'll put a link to that there, and they'll all be in the show notes, which listeners can find through the podcasting tab on my website or through Acast through the show notes. So, Corey, I've learned so much, and I'm so grateful to you for sharing so generously, for helping us to make more sense, have more of an understanding about how really the role that mindfulness can play in our lives, and really extend and broaden our understanding, because I think it's really important, and it can have such a powerful impact on us for our mental health and our functioning, our connections, and our role in our community. So I really love that you've been able to bring all of that together for us. So thank you very much. We're very grateful.
My pleasure. Thank you for what you're doing. I looked into putting a podcast together, and when I saw how much work it was, I decided not to. So thanks for what you're doing out there as well.
Oh, thank you for saying so. I really enjoy it, and I just pinch myself sometimes that I have the privilege of meeting people like yourself and learning. It extends my understanding as a person and as a professional, and it enables me to support others. So I consider this a real privilege, but yes, it does take a lot of time.
Yeah, it takes a lot of time. Yeah, okay.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much, Corey.
My pleasure. Thanks, Jodi.
Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr Jodi Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.